Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Business in Calgary podcast, powered by Sonic Coaching. I'm your host, Oliver Basner. I'm pleased to be here with Darren Curran. He's the president and CEO of Bantrel and is on the cover of December edition of Business in Calgary magazine. So welcome, Darren.
Thank you, Oliver. Thanks for having me today.
So just to give you a little bit of background about Bantrel, it's a 40-year-old company that started as a small engineering company and is now one of the largest, most respected engineering, procurement, and construction companies in Canada. For those of you that shorten that, it's known as EPCs. So I'm curious. I know you've only been there 7 years yourself, Darren, and you had a little bit of history early in its early days. And so, tell us about a little bit, walk us through the history of Bantrel. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, that's phenomenal growth from this small little company to the, really one of the largest companies in Canada now in your space.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Actually, we're 42 years old this year, so we're definitely getting middle-aged, but I think we're still full of spit and vinegar. So back in the early days, it really was like less than 10 people that started this company. And ton of entrepreneurial spirit, set out really to go build projects off the east coast of Canada. Offshore oil and gas, there had to be Canadian ownership. So one of the partners at the time was the Bechtel Corporation, which is a family-owned business, a large global American-based company.
Right.
And to do this work offshore, you needed Canadian partners. And amongst those Canadian partners was the McCaig family. And those two have really been the foundation of the company since day one. Mm-hmm. So proud history there. Those first few years, I'm sure, were absolutely tough. Scraping by, making do.
And it was a bad economy back then too.
Absolutely,
when they started, right? 20%
right.
interest rates.
Yes. And so those early years were definitely not profitable years for Bantrel, right? Those first couple of years. But you talk about that courage, that entrepreneurial spirit, and that East Coast work didn't work out. But then the oil sands came along, right? And the oil sands, of course, was this massive opportunity here in Alberta. It was all new. I mean, the oil sands is that old now. And so that opportunity came along, and that was really Bantrel's opportunity for growth. And that's where the company grew rapidly at first. That was one of the big times. And then the other was, with the growth of heavy oil, there was this heavy oil that was getting such a discount
right.
to light oil because nobody could process this stuff. The existing refining system, mostly in the US, just wasn't set up for it. And so then this upgrader boom came along. And that was kind of the second surge in Bantrel, where we grew like crazy, the industry grew like crazy. There certainly wasn't enough resources.
Right.
And so everyone grew. And that was really the opportunity that got us from engineering procurement into direct hire construction and construction management. And it was just that, this great times of need, which hopefully we're coming back into again now.
Hopefully, yes. Definitely some good things happening on the political front,
yes.
which I'm sure we'll talk about later. So talk about your personal experience, because you've got some international experience, and not everybody has that opportunity. So, when that sort of opportunity knocked, how did you make the decision to actually go? And how did it transpire? That's
a great question. Through my career and really through my life, a lot of what I've done is just say yes. And so when an opportunity comes up, be open to it. And maybe don't overthink it, right? And so some of these things that I look back on, I can't say as I really planned it out or I was, that thoughtful, but I just said yes. And that's how, now going into engineering, I grew up farm boy, north of Brooks, Alberta. So I didn't know any engineers growing up. I didn't have any engineers in the family. Now my family's full of them. Friends, of course, a career in this. And one thing I wanted to do, I had a bug to go work overseas. And engineering is one of those professions where it's very portable.
Right.
You can work anywhere. And so that was one of the reasons I took engineering. And I had that bug. And I the job market again was terrible when I came out of engineering. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to get a job. I worked out in Regina at a refinery out there at the Co-op refinery, and that was fantastic first experience. Got really hands-on. Got to see how stuff worked, build stuff, operating plant. Just such a great place to be a sponge and learn. And then that's when I came back to Bantrel. And I had a roommate who was working with me at the refinery, and he moved back to Calgary. He's from Calgary. And he said, man, Darren, this company is fantastic. It's growing like crazy. There's all these opportunities, like, you should apply. And so I applied, and I interviewed, and I was offered a role, and I just said yes, right? And that was one step closer. And through that early time at Bantrel,
Right.
I had an opportunity to go work down the States. So I did some work in the Pacific Northwest, and then I spent some time in Houston working with with our major shareholder, Bechtel, in Houston. And that was a bit of a bug, and to me that was a step closer to that international market.
Right.
But I was impatient. I was young, right? And
Of course.
And nothing happens quick enough. And I was having this great career at Bantrel. I was getting lots of opportunities. And another opportunity came up. I got a call out of the blue, and it was to go work for a different company in Houston. And I just said yes. And during that time, I'd met Myrna, who's not my wife, at Bantrel, an engineer also. And we went down there together. We just did this. We said yes. And almost immediately we went overseas. We had opportunities to go overseas, to work in Southeast Asia, Korea, South of China, Middle East. And it was just for that fact of saying yes to things and then seeing where they would lead. And it was just such an incredible experience. We worked overseas for about a decade before we had kids.
Right.
And it was easy. We're both working, we're moving around, we're very portable, and everything was a new adventure.
Sounds like no regrets there at all.
No regrets. No,
Yeah.
I mean it was fantastic, and we got such a wide cultural experience. We still love to travel, but it's one thing going on a vacation somewhere for a week or something, and try. But it's another thing living in a culture,
Right.
And even more so working in a culture, because working the way. Even the difference between working in Canada and working in the U.S., our cultures are surprisingly different.
They are.
Given that we share a border, it's. I look back and I find that so interesting.
And then I'm guessing that all that experience, whether it's U.S. or internationally, probably served you currently, right? Because you're coming with such a broad view of how the world works. So talk a little bit about that. What were some of those learnings you were able to bring back?
Oliver, that's a really good question, and I would maybe say it's a few things. One thing is a bit broader understanding of how different people think, how they tick, what motivates them, And if you want to lead people, you really gotta listen, you gotta understand. And one of the things about working in countries where English isn't a foreign language,
Right.
is you have to listen a lot more purposefully. You really have to actively listen because for example, in China, when I worked in China, I didn't speak Mandarin. The language is incredibly tough. My wife picked up more than I did.
Yeah.
But how we bridged that with people we worked with, and many of the people we worked with, we hired people that spoke some degree of English, right? I was working
Right.
for Caltex at the time, but when we worked with our contractors on site, our construction contractors, or maybe our engineering partners, they may not. And so what I had an assistant who was a young woman with an English degree,
Right.
Chinese national,
Yeah.
and she would be my translator. And she would have cell phone. If she wasn't with me, I would call, I'd hand the phone back and forth. And what I would have to think if I wanted to explain something is I would have to think, I'm trying to explain something technical to my counterpart who understands technical but not our language.
Right.
But it's going through this translator
Who probably doesn't understand
who
technical.
doesn't understand it. You're right. And so I would have to think, how can I describe this in simple layperson's language so that she could translate that in simple layperson language and then trust that my counterpart would take that back technical and then test it.
Right.
And have a back and forth and really ensure that you're communicating clearly. Mm-hmm. So that was one. The other big thing I think for my career was I always felt like I was put in roles or offered roles where I was way over my head. And I just felt, oh my gosh, I'm an imposter here. How can I be doing this work? And
It's a real thing, isn't it?
it was,
Yeah.
and yet somehow it worked, and you know, and you had other, and so that helped in a few ways. It helped, you know, ask for help from other people around you,
Right.
Knowing that you don't know, and then also building that confidence that, yeah, you know, I managed to get through that, and I led that, and that turned out okay, and so then that next one isn't scary.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's great.
So those are kind of two takeaways. The other was just, you know, what a great life experience.
Yeah.
Like just the opportunity to see these places and have these memories was
Of course.
just a side benefit of working there.
Yeah, memories and pictures, and
Yeah.
you can't take that away.
Yeah.
You know, I want to circle back to something you said earlier. You were young, ambitious, and things never move quick enough when you're young. And and so, and I can relate because I was exactly the same, right? I wanted to get to the next stage and the next stage of my career. And so, what do you say to those young people who, you know, now are graduating as engineers or not engineers, right? That, you know, they're working maybe even for your company, and they want to progress and they want to get to that next level. I want to be a director. I want to be a project manager. How do you slow them down? How do you ground them and let them know that they'll get there? What's the advice you'd give to somebody who's just fresh out of university?
It's funny. I've had some of these sessions. We'll have a ask anything session with some of our, you know, newer engineers or newer technical people or new grads, and just say that, ask anything. And that's a common question. You know, how do I get there?
How do I get to your job?
Right.
Probably,
That's
right?
exactly the question. And I always say, you know what? There isn't one path. I mean, first and foremost, I mean, you get around your reputation. Like, work hard. That above all else is work hard. You know, be humble. You know, other people will recognize you. They may not recognize you all the time, but they will. So do that. Say yes. Be open to lots of things.
Right.
I don't know that I would advise people to be patient. I would say be bold, and talk to people. Let, you know, your supervisors, your peers, your other people in the company, even outsiders, let them know what you want. Like, don't be shy. And then also ask them and get lots of points of view, because it's fine for me to say what worked for me, but I truly believe there's also a lot of luck. Did I work hard? You know, did I do good things? Sure. But there was just opportunities that went, you know, in my favor that I don't necessarily think I earned. And so, you know, that can happen, that cannot happen. You're going to get setbacks along the way. Don't get discouraged. Just keep going and just say yes. That's the big one of the advice I have.
That's great advice, actually. Yeah, especially, I mean, the saying yes part, right? Because had you said no anywhere along your career, we might not be sitting here today.
I believe that. I absolutely believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. You know, one of your most important values in the company is safety. You know, your value statement, you know, and I looked it up, is, you know, we are driven by an unwavering promise to keep our people and sites 100% safe. That's a huge commitment to your people. And so how do you deliver on that value? And then how do you keep it top of mind? You've got 1,000 or so employees. How do you make sure that's always the focus on those different job sites?
I really want to emphasize what our values are, and I'll come back and ask you where you found that later. Safety is not a value. Safety is a base requirement.
Okay.
We look at
Well
safety
said.
for us.
Yeah.
Safety is absolutely core
Table
to our
stakes.
business. Table stakes, yeah. Our values are care for what matters,
Right.
deliver as promised, and integrity always. And I could make an argument that integrity always is also table stakes, because you have no business being a business if that isn't core. So that's why, you know, we had a longer set of values. That's where you've got that from. And about 5 years ago, we took those down to something that you could remember and you could live. Something that we would hire for, that we would promote for, and that we would fire for. And so we're very serious about those. And of course, other things get wrapped up. So if I go to what your question was, Oliver, on care for what matters.
Right.
Clearly, we care for our people. We care for the people on our job sites. we care for our communities, we care for the environment. So that is wrapped up in care for what matters, and safety is a component of that.
Right.
But it's larger than that. We have, our people just give so much back to communities. We have incredible volunteerism. We get involved in lots of things. We do this kind of year-end video we have client appreciation events, staff, Christmas events, and we roll this video every year, and a big part of it is what we've done in our communities. And that really hits to care for what matters. And the one that really, if I had to pick one that means the most to me, it's really that deliver as promised. And our clients count on us. We say we're going to do something. We're going to help them build out their projects, and those projects are going to help them build their business.
Right.
And so if we don't do that, then we are not helping build their business. So that deliver as promised comes down to, in our business of projects, engineering, construction, it really comes down to safety, cost, schedule, quality. And
Right.
those are the primary measures that we measure ourselves against on, do we deliver as promised?
Love that, actually. Yeah, and I actually like that you simplified the values, right? So first of all, you can remember it, right? It's not something on a wall that gets forgotten. I mean, I've seen organizations with 10 values, but nobody remembers all 10 of them, right? And so it just speaks to your whole culture. So I want to talk a little bit about that culture. I mean, you've got multiple offices across the country. How do you make sure the culture stays there as first and foremost? I mean, you're proud of your culture. How do you make sure every office has, is sort of living the culture, living that whole piece that you've laid out?
It's not easy, that's for sure. You see lots of motherhoods on culture, right? You know, culture eats strategy for breakfast, all those kinds of things.
There's all kinds of catchphrases, yeah.
But that bit about culture really starts at the top, I believe. And so it has to start there. Culture is something that starts at the top and comes up from the bottom. And so one thing on our values is we asked ourselves, is this us? Is this genuine? And are we aspiring to these values, or do we live these values? And so part of it was narrowing down to that short list of values that we believe we live.
Right.
So that makes it easier to start with. The second is, you have to talk about it. You have to talk over and over and over about it, and you have to incorporate it into your decisions, and you have to incorporate it into, whether you're praising someone or acknowledging someone, or whether you're correcting someone or giving some constructive feedback. You have to take it back to your values. And that, for us, is how we live them. And of course, you mentioned our offices. Our offices are somewhat easier because there's kind of a core group of people that come to that office every day.
Right. It
can be harder on our construction sites, because our construction sites, by nature, have a start and an end, right?
And possibly different people on every project, right?
And you're right, a much higher new people coming in, different people coming out, and then also, you'll find a project culture. And so that project itself will have a life of its own. And so making sure that our values resonate, and then, sometimes we partner with our competitors,
right? And
they'll have their values and their cultures. So now you're merging cultures, and you're coming generally with some kind of a middle ground or a compromise position,
right?
Which is appropriate. So yeah, I would say easier in our office locations, more work in our site locations, but you just got to keep reinforcing it.
Yeah. Earlier you said you hire by your values, you fire by your values. Tell me about that, because I agree with you. I think it's critical. But how do you make sure people are actually doing that, right? Does every decision flow through those values?
I would like to say every decision does. I think that wouldn't be authentic, no. And so the step is if you see a decision that is incongruent with those values, step back, put up a hand, question it. Say,
right.
Hey, really, do we really want to be making this decision that is not congruent with us? Now, some decisions, do we make any decisions that violate our integrity? I believe, no, and there's harsh consequences
Yes, there is.
to doing that. You know, when I say we hire and fire to our values, fire sounds harsh. You know, the word fire even isn't used anymore versus releasing. Or letting go. You know what I mean? There's kinder words, and that doesn't happen very often. It's very rare.
Right.
So that's one. You know, others, caring for what matters has got a much broader range than integrity. Integrity is much more black and white to me than caring for what matters is. What matters to me might be a little different than what matters to you, Oliver.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you talked about, you know, you're proud of how you give back to the community as well. So is that all the way back to the original days when the company was founded?
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, and you know, some of this, you know, I had an early career with Bantrel, and then I went away for a number of years and I came back. And so I remember, obviously, those bits when I was there and I was a young engineer and I was part of that crew. And now, you know, I'm not a young engineer anymore. but
An experienced engineer.
Yes, I'm an experienced engineer. Still think I'm young. But what we've done over the years is we have people who've been with the company over 35 years. And so they have this institutional memory, and hearing the stories from them and having them recount some of these that I wasn't part of is just so insightful. And then along the way, we've kind of made some memory books. There's one that I think of, and it was Bantrel at 25 years.
Right.
Right? And I still find it interesting to go back and flip through that book, and there's a bunch of community then, and there's, you know, the terrible clothing and hairstyles of the day, and people are just, as a group, giving back to the community, doing these charity events, and things that when I see them in the book, I remember, but I've long since forgotten about.
Right.
So yeah, it goes way back to the start.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and they're going to say 25 years from now when they look at our pictures, the terrible clothing and hairstyles, right?
And I think honestly, some of that flows from our owners. You know Jeff Oliver. I mean, I can't say enough good about Jeff McCaig, but when you look at, you know, what the McCaig family does for the community, you know, through, you know, various initiatives they have, you know, water for people and clean water for poor countries, you know, the Cancer Center, the Flames Foundation.
Right.
The Flames Foundation does so much in our community that you look at that and you say, how can you not see that and be inspired by it and want to do the same? And then the Bechtel family as well. You know, Bechtel is a family managed business but partner owned. And what Bechtel does globally is they give back so much in such a big way. They're such a big entity that when you look at those type of examples, it's pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you brought up Jeff, and as you know, I had him on the show a few months ago, and so, you know, you've worked with him now for quite a while. He's your board chair.
Yes.
Right? So talk a little bit about Jeff, and, you know, does he inspire you? Like, you know, what have you learned from Jeff directly? You know, aside from obviously the huge community involvement that he has as well. He's quite a humble gentleman, right?
He's very humble. These, you know, the Junior Achievement Award, it was awesome being there, and you know, when it's Jeff's turn to get up and get his award, he spoke, you know, he couldn't have spoke less about himself and more about Junior Achievement. It was all about Junior Achievement and what an amazing organization, and that is just his personality. But aside from that, and Jeff has been a fantastic mentor, so I consider this a huge blessing in my career to have that mentorship.
Right.
But he's first and foremost very entrepreneurial. And so he has this curiosity. He'll want to know the why on things. He always says, I'm not an engineer, but he thinks a lot like you. He's a lawyer by trade. I mean, that was his formal training. Was
okay.
A lawyer.
So similar thinking style, right? Ask deep questions, think it through.
Yes, inquire, thinks deeply about stuff. So that, I mean, his business knowledge, you know, things like, you know, as a chair of our board, you know, there's an efficiency to being chair and running the governance things that we have to do.
Right.
And asking those questions of the what if, or okay, you know, what are your mitigations against this? Or how are you going to grow the business? and then really trying to understand it when it's not the core business that he grew up in. And then also, you talk about that institutional memory, you know, he was there at the table with his dad, with Bud, when the deal was signed to form Bantrel. And so he has been a part of Bantrel, whether watching from the side or being our chair for, you know, his whole adult life, basically.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the past couple decades as our chair. And so that continuity brings a lot. The other thing that I've learned from him is, you know, he's an amazing gentleman. So he respects people. He treats people with kindness, with respect, but he's not soft. You know, and so there's a difference between being soft and being respectful. And so those are things that I appreciate about him.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's excellent. So, you know, lots going on in the political world right now, and, you know, some positives that we're seeing between, you know, national versus Alberta. What are your thoughts? What's the future hold?
I'm super excited. You know, if you would have asked me this a year ago, boy, I would have been a lot more. I probably wouldn't have ever been pessimistic, because that's not my nature.
More subdued?
Optimistic, but I would have been way more cautiously optimistic.
Right.
You know, there's lots of speculation of you talked about last Thursday with Prime Minister Carney and Premier Smith here in Calgary, and there's lots of speculation as to what will be announced. And I'll always say talk is one thing, but action is what matters. So the fact that they signed that MOU, you know, they put their, well, one of the things we have in our company is own your signature. You know,
Right.
As engineers, you sign off, you certify documents, your reputation, your ability to practice engineer is behind that, right?
Absolutely it is.
And so, you know, owning your signature is really important. The fact that, you know, our provincial and federal leaders have signed that document, and that there was compromise on both sides. They both went back and got flack from their parties.
Yes, they did.
You know, I mean, there's resignation of Guibert. And so they both had to, I think, you know, Danielle, some of her party, they both had to move to a position of compromise. And this is, I'm not quoting Jeff here, because him and I were talking about this a couple days ago, was that's probably a good outcome, where neither side is truly happy.
It's true.
You know, that's probably a good compromise and something that will come to fruition.
That you can work with, right?
Absolutely. And so, you know, it pains me to look south of the border, and, you know, with our Bechtel ownership, one thing that pains me is just the development of LNG in the U.S. Gulf Coast. Right? It pains me, not because I don't want what's good for them. That's been fantastic for Bechtel and our company and Bantrel to some extent, but it's such a missed opportunity for Canada.
Right.
And I was at a economic forum in Toronto a number of years ago, and I won't name, but I sat next to one of the ministers, federal ministers, in Prime Minister Trudeau's government. And I got into him about this, and I said, you know, like, what's with LNG? It's displacing coal, it's greening the earth, it's like, it's getting produced anyways, and it's going, so why are we not developing this on the west coast of Canada? Why is Canada not getting this value? And he looked at me, and he kind of put his hand on my arm, and he said, oh, Darren, he says, we've just avoided all that wasted capital. We're going straight to hydrogen. And he believed it. And he believed it, and so I believe he was misinformed. Hydrogen is still niche, still a long ways away.
Yeah.
Other than some niche applications, LNG is now. Those plants are long paid out. There is no wasted capital. And now that all that capacity is built in the U.S., our natural gas will continue to flow south.
Right.
And so that value add of Canada being this resource-rich country and missing out on the value add, and that's just one example, you know, because we're sitting here in Calgary of natural gas, whether it be that, whether it be upgrading, whether it be refining, whether it be critical minerals processing, whether it be battery manufacturing, or whether it be, you know, the data center boom that we're still currently missing out on, are things that we have to bring that value back to Canada, because if we have a strong economy, then we can do all these other things that we want to do. We want good schools, right? We want, our teachers to be paid well and to have enough teachers in the class.
Healthcare.
We want a great healthcare system. We want social supports. We don't want to see people, unhoused and with mental issues. We need money to fund that.
Yes,
and
we
so
do.
a strong economy allows us to fund those kind of things that are good for our society.
Absolutely, they do.
So
Yeah.
I get passionate about that.
I couldn't
I
tell.
could go on. I know you couldn't
That's
tell.
awesome.
But I
Yeah.
think, that's the past. I'm excited about the opportunity. Do I
Yes.
think we squandered the last decade? Yes. Do I think it's too late? No. We got
Right.
so much talent in Canada. We can do this, and it's going to take a lot of experience, cooperation, but we can do this. So
Between
I'm super
industry
excited.
and government.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
And it's going to take compromise. Industry, government, First Nations,
Yes.
federal, provincial. It's just going to take some compromise.
But if we look ahead, it's a win-win-win for everybody,
Yes.
right?
I believe that.
Including the people.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I have a couple of, as we're sort of getting to close to the end here, a couple of questions that I ask all my guests. So, the first one is, what do you wish someone would have told you at the beginning of your journey? Like, if you could look back, what do you wish somebody would have said?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would probably say stop and listen more. If I look back to when I was a younger man, and now I'd call my kids strong-willed, but I was stubborn. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that thinking you know better than you probably do, I'd probably listen more. And then I'd probably maybe take a second and stop and think. And I still struggle with that today. I don't struggle with being decisive. What I struggle with is taking a step back and saying, you know what, I'm going to sleep on this for a night, and then I'm going to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
And that would probably have been good advice for young me.
Awesome. I really like that answer, actually, because it's interesting, because the older I get, because I was the same, right? I had all the answers when I was younger. The older I get, the more I learn, the more I realize I've got so much more to learn. Right?
Yeah.
So
and it's it'll never end, right? I believe I'll always look back and say, oh, I could have done this better, or what can I learn, or
Totally.
Yeah.
And then the second question is, I really see, because of the space I'm in, with Sonic Coaching, I mean, one of the things that I see is personal development and professional development. They're really one and the same, right? And so, what's been one of your favorite self-development tools or books you want to recommend to our listeners?
It's a good question. I read leadership books off and on. And one of the ones that was most powerful was a book called Servant Leadership, and it's written as a parable. It's got a Christian basis to it, but it's really a book for anyone, because the parables are really about examples of serving others and putting others' needs ahead of your own. So that's one. There's a number of great books out there.
I remember that. I have that one on my shelf.
You
actually.
do,
Yeah.
And so your feeling on it is it?
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's it's got the white with the blue surrounding on the cover, right? And I completely agree. In fact, I contributed a chapter on leadership a few years ago in a book called With Excellence.
Yeah.
And I said the foundation of great leadership is being of service.
Interesting. Isn't that a small world?
Yeah.
And it's not a hard read.
No,
I mean,
it's
it's
a
not
small little book.
It's not one of these books that could be 200 pages and it's 400 pages to sell a book, right?
Right.
And it's funny because that book was actually given to me by one of my team members, who I think is just a tremendous servant leader and really, worked for me, but led by example and mentored me as one of my employees. So that was a really neat experience. The other thing that I think was hugely valuable is I coach my kids in sports. My kids grew up, I got girls and boys, and they grew up playing mostly hockey and ringette and other school sports. And And what I loved about coaching and leading people at work is you take leadership training at work, and I'd always say, how can I apply that to coaching? And you'd take coaching training, you know, for coaching youth,
Yep.
and you'd say, boy, that would really apply at work. And one of those is the right to correct, right? And so as you're, you know, different training will tell you different things, but as you're coaching kids, catch them doing something right 4 times for every one thing you want to correct or
Yes.
improve or change. And that can be super hard,
It can be very hard.
right? And I think it can be harder at work because when people are doing things right, that's kind of your base expectation. But it's so much more important to correct, and that's still something that honestly I work on today. You know, it's something that I'm not great at today.
Yeah, we both agree on that. Yeah, I'm not. I could be better. Even when I look around at home, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, don't talk to me about that.
I still have a 19-year-old at home, right? So it's like,
Right.
oh yeah, 4 to 1, right? Yeah.
So I keep that in my mind, and that's something I learned through doing both.
Great tip.
Yeah.
Really, really like that. So, yeah, thank you. I mean, you've shared some great experiences and, you know, given some great tips to our listeners, and, you know, I think we could go on for another half an hour, you and I, right?
Great. This is really enjoyable. Thank you for bringing back some great memories too. Like, you asked some great questions that made me think back to and kind of go, huh. I haven't
Perfect.
thought about that.
That's great. And as a result, you shared some great advice as well and great stories. So you've been listening to the Business in Calgary podcast powered by Sonic Coaching. I've been talking with Darren Curran, President and CEO of Bantrel, and I'm your host, Oliver Basner. Watch for our next podcast in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone.